So thank you very much to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation in collaboration with the Friends of the Upper Delaware River, Division of Fish and Wildlife, New York, and the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission. And that was part of the 3-year Upper Delaware Joint Fisheries Investigation Plan. You'll hear a lot about this. Was sort of the funding for the Big River process. And then the Embrace the Stream program with Trout Unlimited and the Shahawken chapter of Trout Unlimited sort of funded the stream survey portion of this presentation, and then also worked with the National Park Service. So thanks to everyone on this. Really interesting project and a gorgeous area. Just as some information, I'm out of Nashville, Tennessee, and so we work all over the country, and I had not been on the Upper Delaware River before this work. As a little background, as I saw some of those excellent presentations already, just as a little bit of background to what we do, we sort of work in the stream management and restoration component of the work, trying to find out what are the problems in the system, where do you find them, what can you do to fix them, sort of really the basic things on what stream and river management's all about, with the five most common goals being improve water quality, manage your riparian zones, improve in-stream habitat for different species, allow fish passage, and then stabilize stream banks. But the real question is where, why, how, and that hasn't been super easy over time. We typically, in our industry for a long time, we've done transect surveys or limited site surveys where we go out and document the heck out of very small areas, stretch tapes across, measure depth, measure water quality, measure everything in these small little areas. And they're typically restricted by access. A lot of the surveys are on bridges or boat ramps, all of those kind of things to get into the system. They're small, these rivers and streams cover miles and miles, and we might be able to do a few hundred meters per day. So the areas that are surveyed are relatively small. It takes a ton of time. This picture is a great shot where we have 3 folks working just to collect information on one transect. So you have 3 people spending a lot of time on one very detailed area. There's issues with the flow and depth. We have one set of surveys that are done for wadable creeks, another set of surveys done on bigger rivers. And so it's very hard to compare what's going on in the systems. And then as we move towards sort of the more modern era of stream walks, where we're able to see things, we're typically really looking at bad areas and we're not documenting everything. So this has been known for a long time. We have the big picture landscape modeling where the satellites are able to take pictures of everything. And then we have these very detailed sort of traditional samples. But Fausch et al. In 2002 published that it's really critical when we're talking about actual fish and management of these rivers to understand this intermediate scale, this sort of 1 to 100 kilometers or 100-mile reaches of a river, to try to get an understanding of what's really happening. We have this ability to see the whole basin from satellite imagery, and we have this information to be able to make these detailed maps, but we really lacked anything in the middle. And so in my career, this was a big hindrance as we did projects at both of these levels, but couldn't answer a lot of the questions that were being asked. So pushing now 12 or more years ago, we started working on the high definition stream survey approach. And we had one other huge problem that we have. I happen to come from the world of fisheries and conservation, and it's usually a poorly funded area. Yet we have a lot of other things happening on rivers. And so we had methods that looked at things like bridge surveys or infrastructure, different pieces of the water management puzzle, but didn't concern themselves with fisheries. We had a lot of work on hydropower and the amount of in-stream flow type work, water quality work. Then we did have work on fisheries, and fisheries typically use different methods than other folks. And then we had the whole area of outreach and how do we get people who don't spend their life on the water understanding what's actually going on out there and where. And so the approach was to gather try to gather a consistent suite of information that could be used in all of these different applications, and they could all sort of blend together over into the integrated planning framework that EPA basically would like people to use to manage their streams and rivers. So sort of jumping forward quickly to how do we do this? How do we collect the data? Well, we collect the data on backpack systems, small boats like kayaks, and you can see the GPSs and cameras all over it. The larger inflatable boats, all three of these were used on the upper Delaware and the tributaries. And in some cases, we also use drones. That wasn't used in this project, so I won't really be talking much about that. What do we collect when we go out there and collect it? And this is a shot from a long, long ago, back when I was on some of the first kayak work. And we have cameras and various sensors shooting out to the side. So we get imagery looking at the right and left stream bank, the riparian and infrastructure. We have cameras that shoot forward so we can see what's coming, the habitat type, the amount of canopy cover. We have sonar of different kinds that are shooting down underneath the boat so we can see the condition of the substrate, water depth, and all those kind of information. We have a water quality sensor running continuously the whole time, so it's gathering information on that. We typically can also do cross-sectional transects, which we did in this project, and they can be done many different ways, looking at just the bathymetry or river discharge. And in some projects, we collect water grab samples along the way for eDNA studies. But all of this stuff is basically merged with every second where we have a GPS recording, which has the time, the location, and the water surface elevation. So at every point as we move down this river, every second of time, all of these different sensors can be tied to this information so that we end up with a track of information at about 1 meter resolution running down the whole system. What are we looking for? Well, we're looking for things like visual habitat. What do we see? This is on the upper Delaware River. I'll come back to this one and describe it a little better, but the video is put into a left and right imagery we see out in front of us, the map of where we are, the little boat will move along. This is the down looking sonar and the side scan sonar. We also have water quality and other things that are in the database with it. And we have underwater imagery running at the same time to compare with the side scan sonar. So we have a lot of information on visual habitat. We also collect a lot of digital information. So water depth, elevation, slope, and habitat type. Here's about a 13-kilometer section, so it's going to be very difficult to see that at 1 meter resolution, but it's pretty easy to see where the river is steeper, where you might have pools in that, or a steep riffle and a large pool, big drop. It's easy to see through the system. And remember, this is every meter of the river. So on the upper Delaware River area, we covered 77 miles. And so there's just an incredible number of points to begin looking at what's happening in the system. And from this kind of information, it's easy to translate that. As I said, you can see the pools, the riffles and drops, and it's able to be translated into a habitat type information throughout the system. We also collect the underwater habitat using side scan and video. This is the upper Delaware River. The next picture I'll show is from another place. It shows you a different example, but this is side scan sonar, which is basically using sweep sonar technology to get a black and white image of the bottom where you can see boulders and you can see the waves in the sand. So you can document the actual substrate throughout the system. That can be verified using the underwater video. So you can actually determine what this type signature, these boulders here, actually look like in reality.
All right. Just have to measure and make sure this would work. Oh.
So I will, I'll show you an example here from, this is from in Alabama, where we're working below a large dam, and they were doing environmental flow releases. And you can actually see the same little nick in the side. This is 3 years later from a survey. And you can see the bottom, here's all kinds of boulders and hard substrate, but it was mostly sediment. They're dealing with in-stream flow releases, trying to improve habitat for endangered mussels. So a different situation than what's going on in the upper Delaware, but again, trying to manage water releases for the habitat and multi-use needs of all kinds of different people. This is what it looks like after 3 years of the environmental flow. You still see the hard rock here, but the amount of sediment that's been removed from the system is substantial. So we're able to go back and now quantify on a meter resolution the actual change in the system, which is what things like mussels or trout would respond to. And then, as I said, water quality is running. This is another different project completely. We're coming down looking at specific conductivity. And here was a water treatment facility coming in from this small little creek that was out of compliance with their regulations. And you can see the immediate change in the quality of water as you pass that incoming tributary. You'll also notice these little red dots in here. This is a small stream, and we have to drag these boats over lots of log jams and trees. And so you get a signature of the air when these sensors are pulled completely out of the water and going down the river. But it is very nice, and we collect all kinds of information in, again, a continuous fashion. And then we're collecting cross-sectional transects, and where needed, we can shoot LiDAR to get sort of the 3D channel imagery to build much more sophisticated models. What the LiDAR was not shot on the upper Delaware because there's actually aerial LiDAR for some of these areas. But a lot of times we're going in and doing site surveys for infrastructure, looking at the impacts and how it would be, and we can develop three-dimensional models for it. And I'm going to show another little piece. All of this stuff now works in your typical mapping software. Here's an image from the Chattahoochee River for the National Park Service. This is actually me walking along, but I want to see on the map, there's a little bridge in here that they have installed on one of their trails, and they're wanting to know if they have any issues with it. So now you can go back to your mapping software, click on the map, and look up, and oh, there's the little bridge. So you can navigate within all of this video and water quality and all of this information and actually see the conditions that are going on in the stream. Now, this was a project that was actually after the upper Delaware River, but the beauty of all this is writing the software, we're able to add all of this stuff back into the upper Delaware project. So this capability is now available for basically all the projects that we've done. So this is great. So all of the data that you'll see here is embedded and useful within these kind of applications. So jumping to why I'm actually here to tell you about that was sort of a very brief overview of what we're trying to do. But we surveyed 77 miles of the upper Delaware River, basically the east and west fork or branch, and then the main stem, and then also Equinox and Shahawken Creeks, looking at the condition of the stream corridor and trout habitat suitability. And then we're planning on doing fish surveys of the creeks, and I'll get to that in a little while. This was done in late summer of 2020. All the data, this project has been turned in, so a 500-page report on the main river and another 100-page report on the tributaries. It's all organized in a geospatial relationship where all of this information is organized and able to be used. We also created map atlases. So all of this information is in paper form in these reports for folks who do not have the capability to use sort of modern GIS software. That's not a problem. You can go through and look at the sort of map atlas approach, zoom in. It also has all the river miles and all the local names for areas. So you can go in and see what area you're concerned about, and then look at all the different characteristics I'll be showing in this further presentation. So what does it look like? This is a shot. Obviously, here's Hancock. This is on the lower east, and we're coming down, and you see two boats or two tracks, the green and the red, and these are the two boats that we used for the river survey to make sure that we got good imagery and coverage of the whole system. If we zoom in a little bit, you can see the boats tracking on the left and right onto the river. And you can zoom in a little bit more and you can begin to see that recording of every second of information. So this is the GPS track of the two boats. You can see this boat actually gets hung on the gravel bar right here and we have to get out and push it, and then it goes again. So you can zoom in and see exactly what's happening. A piece of information that's very important to understand is when you see this, all of this is available. So we know this point, we know the boat, we know the imagery, but we also need to integrate two separate data tracks into one so that we have one common piece of information. These are those two tracks moved to a center line so that we're able to also have the overall condition of the river that allows us to look at a lot of other different pieces of information. So I mentioned that there's a ton of data in here and that's all linked to your GIS systems. Here's the East Branch. I have a red dot right here and I'm going to jump to a video in the next scene, but I want you to see that this is 9/3/2020 at 11/14/55. It's on track 411 and this is knotweed code. And it's on the left side and there is knotweed and there is no knotweed on the right side. So if we start the video from this exact place, which is the next slide, and I'll start it, we're coming down right under the bridge and we can look over and see the knotweed on the left side of the river and the lack of knotweed on the right side of the river. So the information that's contained within the database is verifiable with the information that's provided in the videos and all the other associated information. So we can now look from a map perspective, from a video perspective, or a data perspective to look at these various things that we're interested in. You can also see large woody debris, islands, all kinds of neat things from this sort of video. And it allows you to sort of do a virtual tour of the system. Oops. I'll jump forward. So we have that ability now to integrate all the data, all the video, and all the collection and look at it in a map perspective. The stream corridor assessment of it is an approach that sort of looks at the condition of the left and right riparian zones, the left and right stream bank, the stream bed, and then any discrete features, bridges, outfalls, log jams, anything you might see in it. This is an approach that systematically goes through and collects that information. And interestingly, and I didn't know anything about Japanese knotweed prior to this survey, the approach we use is not designed where we collect or we set up our survey information beforehand. So we didn't say, is there knotweed present? All that is done post-survey from the video. So when we learned that Japanese knotweed was an issue, it was very easy to add it in as something we were interested in collecting the information on. And I'll touch back on that here in the future. So what did we see from the stream corridor assessment? Overall, as probably many of you know, the Upper Delaware River is in good condition. There are issues, there are areas that are that need attention, but in comparison to many places we work, the Upper Delaware River is a beautiful river, and there you guys have done a great job in protecting and managing the conditions up there, because this is not typical of a lot of rivers. We see many rivers with over 50% of the river that's in sort of a impaired or non-functional condition. We did observe problems in here, stream bank failure near tributary mouths, stream bank issues in other areas, some sediment runoff issues, infrastructure problems, and then of course the invasive knotweed issue. So what does it look like when we say that? Here's on this side is the aerial image and the track of information. The center green line is the stream bed. Then we have the left or the right and left stream banks, and then the left and right riparian. So these are all sort of the continuous data colorized from red being bad to green being good. And you can see this area here is saying we have an issue on the left stream bank of some impairment. What does that look like? That would be this section. We can see there's anglers out here. This is at Kadoja, so a spot that people fish. But this section of stream bank here is collapsing into the water. And you can kind of see the sediment plume being dropped into the river, or not sediment so much, but cobble coming in here. And that's causing the river to shift and hit this stream bank, and it's causing this erosion. So these issues around sort of the tributary stream mouse was a consistently observed phenomenon. Here it is at Balls Creek. The Balls Creek is coming in here. There's the delta formation from all of the sediment, cobble, boulders being deposited during storms. The river is coming down and has to move, go up hard against this bank. This is the bank here. It's been stabilized for a long time because this is the railroad tracks here. Just upstream of that, this island is getting worn away because the stream has to flow through here, or the river has to flow through. So we can see the effect of these deltas coming in from tributaries on the erosion in other locations. Here's Baxter Brook, another, probably a spot many of you know, with the fire truck sitting out there. And very similarly, Baxter Brook comes in, a lot of sediment is being deposited, the river is being forced to move against the far bank, and you can see as it's starting to cut out this field, and you can see that in the imagery. If we followed that in a video format, you would see where the farmer has been dropping large cement pieces along here to try to prevent this erosion from occurring. So it's sort of an easy way to see from a map perspective, a cause perspective, and then the impact of these different things. We also saw the impact of sediment runoff. Right here, we have an issue with the stream bed. What does that mean? As we come down stream, we're going to see a large plume of sediment coming into the stream. Here's the video for it. And I will say, I tried to limit the video. The video is really cool, but it doesn't always come through very clearly and computer sharing. But this is in high definition, 1080p. It looks excellent if you do have copies of the video. But here we are coming down the stream. And I'm actually in the boat here. And we can see a sediment line coming into the stream. And I'm going to turn the boat up into it to see what's going on here. On the bottom video, it's still pretty clear. And it's not very long. There's that sediment plume coming in, and then we're going to go across it. There it goes right across there, and you begin to see it all showing up in the underwater video. And I'll drive right up into here and run into a big mud bank, basically, and I won't be able to go any farther. And so here's a incoming sediment problem that is, again, sort of easy to document. And you can also look at the impact of how much the area has been covered by sediment if we went in and sort of documented from a side scan imagery approach. Here I'm going to hit the stream bed where it just basically fills in, and at this point I can hardly move anymore. So lots of fine sediment, and it's flowing in from this this tributary that goes past the stone quarry, or the stone cutting section. Here, I'll put it back up in here. We have the bluestone cutting, and the sediment is coming off here. This is a good example of a BMP, or a best management practice, where the little sediment detention basin is probably full and needs maintenance. So we can see those kind of specific issues. We can also see the issues of Japanese knotweed. In this image, the green is absent, or banks without Japanese knotweed, and the red is our banks with Japanese knotweed. Now, at this resolution, we're going to get a lot of overlap on that, but you can really see where the Japanese knotweed is mostly focused. we can go in and see these long sections of it on both banks. You can see it out here in front. And then we were able to quantify it for every meter of the 77 miles that we surveyed for both banks. And basically the overall thing is about 45% of the banks of the upper Delaware within this area are covered by Japanese knotweed. So we not only know the extent of the problem, we know the extent of the problem within any particular reach and overall within the system. So this does not tell you all how to manage it. And I know you have many projects or several projects working on that exact task, but it does give you an idea where the problem is and what could be done or how you might then approach solving it. So that was a very brief run through of what we were seeing from the stream corridor assessment. We were also very interested in what the trout habitat was like. So trout habitat was based on water depth, habitat type, roughness and cover, and then the surface elevation, bed elevation, slope, and water velocity. And we applied these published habitat suitability criteria for adult, juvenile, and spawning habitat for brown trout and adult and juvenile rainbow trout. So what does this kind of look like? Again, I try to show these kind of pictures over and over from a map atlas perspective. All of this information is documented and it's in a geodatabase. You can see areas of deeper water and light being shallower water and go through and see, okay, well, if trout like a little deeper water, you can see one of the things that may be good for them. And it then, of course, can be done average or maximum depth throughout sections. We're also able to look at habitat type. Again, I showed this earlier. Here's habitat type where the blues are deeper water pools and the reds and greens are the riffles and glides. And we're able to then look at the difference between the West Branch, the Upper East Branch, Lower East Branch, and the overall Delaware River, looking at sort of the proportion breakdown with more riffles and glides up in the further headwaters than there are down on the main stem of the river. So again, this is documented for every meter of the river on both sides. Then we have roughness and cover, and how do we actually determine that? Well, we have estimators of water depth, but we have the water depth, and then we have a smooth estimator of what that water depth is and how good the model predicts whether or not the depth is the same as what would be predicted is how rough it is. In other words, on a nice, smooth, sandy area, the sonar hits the bottom in 3 feet, 3 feet, 3 feet, 3 feet, and we have extremely good sort of a smoothed area versus the actual depth. But in areas where the average is 3 feet, but it keeps jumping from 4 feet to 2 feet to 4 feet to 2 feet, we're likely in a boulder field or cobble field, and we have much rougher bottoms. So we're able to classify roughness throughout there, which of course has an effect on the productivity, places for aquatic insects to live, and cover for the animals. And then we're able to take these water surface elevation, bottom elevation maps, along with stream width, determine the slope at any section, and then using those different things allow us to calculate a relative velocity for each section of the river. This one's showing where slope is increased, but we also have that for the relative velocity for every meter of the system. So we're able to then look at how suitable that section is for trout based on velocity. We use the published habitat suitability criteria. Galbraith et al. Did a very nice documentation of everything available on brown trout, rainbow trout, and some other species. Looking at adult, juvenile, and spawning habitat, they looked at the depth and velocity to determine this. Now, they went back to studies that had actually been done on the upper Delaware River, and then every study they could find in the literature to get this information. Very nice study. I took this information, put it into a computer model that then looked at all those same variables throughout the system and came up with a suitability map for basically every meter of the 77-mile survey, where red is poor adult habitat for brown trout and green would be good. And you can just come down through this section looking at it. And that information then can be summarized over to the average suitability for each of these different larger segments, or any segment within there that you'd be interested in. This one's showing a section on the West Branch, and it's based on depth, velocity, substrate, and cover. So that's sort of the approach that was used to determine habitat suitability. What could be done with this? That's always a question. And Jeff said, don't make this too technical, and definitely talk to all kinds of people. Well, there's two things. One, we can look from a fisheries perspective, but we can also look at it from a fishing perspective. And I'll show you what I mean. Here's an example branch where we have the purple is high quality spawning habitat, and the green, the darker greens, are high quality adult habitat for brown trout. So you have places where you have both quality adult habitat for the animals and places that they spawn, and the assumption being that areas where you have those close together would be better than areas where they're far apart. And so from a fisherman's perspective, this would be really interesting to see with the guides and all of the fishing knowledge that you have in the room and in your community, how close that these models predict what we see in the field. And then secondly, from a perspective of the fisheries agencies, you could go through and focus your spawning habitat studies in areas of expected production, and you could see whether or not these things are working. That could be hooked into those gorgeous discharge models we just saw and begin to look at the production of trout over time against discharge and habitat. This would be on the east branch for those of you who fish up that way, downstream of Bolton's Eddy and the upstream of the Rest Stop Pool. Here's an excellent spawning area associated with really good adult habitat. So this again is available in both data and sort of an atlas format for anyone who's interested. And then down on the lower section, or the main river, here above Long Eddy, great adult habitat, as many of you would imagine with how much deep water there is, and then a really good area for spawning just upstream of that. So again, unfortunately, I did not get to trout fish this whole section, so I can't confirm these information, but many in the room probably can, and use this to find new fishing locations, or actually look at the implication of production and habitat based on time and discharge. So that was a very sort of fast run through of the main river survey. At the same time, we were working with Trout Unlimited, the Shahawken chapter of Trout Unlimited, to do a training project where not only did we create this sort of high definition fish survey, we have a similar thing that does underwater surveys for fish. It's called the high definition fish survey. So we're able to go through and look at what's going on underwater from a geo video perspective. We were planning on coming in and training the Trout Unlimited members to go out and do the surveys, because it's very low tech and very doable. It doesn't take a whole lot of money or experience to do this. In fact, the best people are the people who are actually fishermen, because it's very analogous to fishing. So as many projects and as many things in all of your life, COVID changed everything. We could not meet with everybody, do hands-on training, hand gear back and forth, do all of that stuff that we had planned. So we changed on the fly. And so instead of focusing on a training survey for Shahawken Creek, we, meaning me and my colleagues, we went out and did the backpack surveys on Shahawken and Equinunk, and then also did the underwater surveys, which is really good, but it's kind of a sad thing that we weren't able to train the you all up there on doing this, because that would have been a really neat thing to see how many places you all could have seen or gone to. Here's sort of an example of the output. This is again coming from the backpack this time, instead of the boats, but the middle being the stream bed, the two stream bed banks, excuse me, and the two riparian zones. This is Shahawken Creek, and there's the bridge. And as we go up it, as you can see, it's in very good condition. There are a few areas of concern. And here's an example of it from fully functional, which most of it is, to slightly impaired. And there's a few areas where the stream banks are failing within Equinunk and Shahawken Creeks. We also documented the amount of modification in them, whether it's highly modified, slightly modified, or unmodified. So all of this is available again in that same sort of geo-referenced approach. And it allows it to be broken down to look at any of these things. I will not have you guys look at all this kind of data, but it is available and we can go through it. All the point issues were also described, from debris jams to channel bars, incoming channels, woody debris, pipe outfalls, bridges, and they're all documented with their locations. And additionally, the habitat conditions were done. So we have the water depth, we have the habitat type, and substrate or stream bed composition throughout. This one is Equinunk we're looking at here. Just showed it for variety. So this was also done from the river up a few miles. And we're able to compare between the two streams, looking at habitat type. Shahawken is more of a run riffle stream, where Equinunk is more of a run and pool stream. So it has more deep water, and that has an implication for the habitat for the species within it. We're able to take that same information using the exact same models and translate it out to spawning habitat, adult habitat, juvenile habitat. In this case, this is the spawning habitat for brown trout in Shahawken, and here it is in Equinunk. And the purple being the best areas, and you can see there's more purple in Equinunk than in Shahawken. So these are comparable models developed on the actual data within these streams, and makes it very easy to compare. You can see there is more highly suitable habitat for brown trout spawning in lower Equinunk. And this would be, again, very interesting to see what you guys have in terms of your red surveys and all of this information and overall production. This is also done for adult and juvenile, but I won't show all the details of this, because our actual thing was to do the underwater fish surveys. And making sure I'm still going on time, which I am. Here I am actually doing these pole surveys. We have a camera on the end and lights, and then this is geo-referenced, and you basically slowly walk along the stream like any fisherman would, and you're able to put the camera into all of the different locations that you move as you move in an upstream direction. What would you see? Well, first of all, I will say we were able to train one person. Lee Hartman came out. You know, he wasn't, I guess, too worried about COVID. We were all tested negative, but and we were outside, so he was able to do it. Here's a shot of one of the trout he did get from one of the sites. So being an excellent fisherman, he saw the biggest trout of all the surveys in here. So we were able to work a little bit with TU members, but not really in the kind of concept that we had hoped to do. What did we actually see? Well, here's an example of a rainbow trout right here in the creek. This is Shahawken Creek. Here's a small brown trout, and here's a brook trout. So we saw all three trout species in these creeks, and we saw numerous different fish. Here's an example of a shot out in the creek, and there's a rainbow trout right here, and there's a brook trout right here. You can see the habitat, you can see the aquatic insects, all of this. This also is geo-referenced, so we know the exact point at which it is based on the habitat surveys that we just showed in the last few slides. So the habitat, the type of use or the use of that habitat the fish are doing can be applied to an overall suitability model. And here's some of those outputs. Here are brown rainbow brook trout, and you can see where they occur. And then these are cyprinids or minnows and shiners. We also saw smallmouth bass and all kinds of, darters and all kinds of other things in here. But each location, the larger dots are more higher number of species seen in any quadrat. So it shows the distribution. Again, this is just basically like fishing. You get in there and you just move slowly upstream, and you just use the camera to go through everything and see the fish. And since I do have a few minutes here, I'm going to see if I can jump another image up. In fact, I'll just do the reverse. I will finish this and then I'll put up those fish videos so we can see them. Since I'm basically at my conclusions anyways. So in conclusions, we did capture over 80 miles of stream view video and HDSS information on the upper Delaware River, the east and west branch, and all the way down to Callicoon on the main stem, and then Shahawken and Equinunk Creeks. We did the stream corridor assessment, looking at stream bank erosion and invasive plants as the primary issues. The trout habitat assessment, providing a continuate habitat and habitat suitability for adult brown, rainbow trouts, juvenile brown and rainbow, and brown trout spawning habitat. This is highly dependent on suitability criteria. From a sort of technical science side, I don't think the suitability criteria is appropriate at all for use in this. We did use the published information, but I don't think it's very suitable. As you saw, we're talking about a very, very small streams with very shallow water and a big river with lots of deeper water, and the same criteria don't really fit both situations. So but that's a very easy change from a computer modeling perspective to improve habitat suitability and output. And then it's also an approach to find new good fishing areas for those of you who are interested in that. It's an excellent baseline documentation for public outreach, management, and future comparisons. As I showed in one slide, we're doing multiple resurveys in places. In fact, we're on our third survey in some places, and we're able to see all the change over the time, so we can actually see what management actions are resulting in positive outcomes. So a really good approach. All this data is available. The reports are available. The video is all available. And Friends of the Upper Delaware has it all. So with that, thank you. I am Jim Parham. You're welcome to contact me if you have questions, and I'll help you get access to the data or reports. We are a minority woman-owned, economically disadvantaged small business, and we work all over the country on these type of issues. So I think I'm going to—
Can I ask one question?
Absolutely.
About the invasive plants.
Sure.
So I'm a New York State Assembly person. So what could I do to help in that? I mean, in terms of, I don't know how to treat invasive. I don't know. I know most of the time we don't want to use any kind of toxic kind of chemicals or anything like that. So, I know that we bring different, that invasive comes from different places, but what do you do to control it?
So that's a great question. And I really would have to defer to Jeff, and he has some other folks working with him that are answering that exact question. So I'm not a botanist. I'm not an invasive plant manager of any sort. So I don't want to even try to tell you that answer, but I do know that Jeff has been working on that with other consultants on that specific thing, the different ways that it can be done and what the best approach would be. I don't know if that's a topic of the presentations here coming up.
I just was, every
It's a
time I
great
see
question.
the word invasive species, and I'm thinking about, even in the pond that's behind my house, you think about, and it's overgrown and it just doesn't look like it used to do 20 years ago.
Well, the thing is I think that you're absolutely right. I think that there are people who can answer your question more appropriately. What is really interesting from my perspective is I had never heard of Japanese knotweed prior to this survey. And when I went out there, it was blooming just by chance, and it was beautiful. And I asked them, wow, what is this beautiful plant that you have everywhere? And I got kind of, you don't know what you're talking about response. But the neat thing from a technology side is it's all captured regardless of whether I think it's pretty or it's bad or it's good. And now we have documentation where it is and what that actual impact is, so that the next step, which is your question, what do we do about this and how could we do it, could be answered, and how bad that problem actually is. That's almost half of both stream banks covered by this invasive plant. That's not a good thing at all. So your question I can't answer directly. It is really neat how that kind of information can be captured and looked at in more detail now that the imagery and all that information is collected. So I wish I could help more on that, but I know Jeff definitely can lead you in the right direction. And so great question. I still have a couple minutes. I'm going to put up a fish video.
A question. What's the, is there a major policy or change management finding from this study? Something that we should be doing?
So that's another great question. So from our perspective as a, let's say from a business perspective, what we try to do is provide you all the information, because there's many ways to manage a river or a stream. There's many ways to manage the species and balance power, water production, other economic drivers, as well as the species. And so I can show you what we see. And obviously, having seen your presentations, you guys know an absolute ton about this river too, from another perspective. So part of what we're working on, many things, is integrating sort of the discharge models, the in-stream flow approach from these dams with the actual sort of meter resolution of the river to enable even more accurate models to benefit both water availability, power production, and fisheries, and all the other economic potentials. So I can't give you a straight answer, and I feel like, again, I'm trying to step away, but in reality, that is not what we're trying to do. We're trying to lay out the data to blend in with the type information that we were seeing coming out of these other presentations to get a even better, more sophisticated model to allow better use of the water to support multi-use. And again, I can't speak to all of those applications because there's so many excellent people working on numerous different parts of the puzzle. So I hope I didn't defer too far with that non-answer, political non-answer. But the truth is we can see the problem areas. We can see the areas that would need attention. And we can balance those in an overall perspective. If only 3% of them shows these stream banks failure, we know in a natural system, you're going to have stream bank failure as a natural process of the river geomorphology. So is this even a management concern? And so there's ways and places to spend your money as opposed to something like this endangered, or not endangered, this invasive knotweed issue. It may be an overriding issue in which some of these stream bank restoration issues are not the appropriate thing to be spending money on. But that again goes to the overall approach.
Hey, can you folks hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, we had some technical problems. Jim, thanks for all that. It was really great. It's not the first time I've seen it, and it's just pretty amazing. Every time we see it. Peter's question is good. How do we use this? We're thinking about that now. There's probably lots of ways to use this. Translate it into policy initiatives, add to our science on the river. Aileen Gunther is here, and you asked, Aileen, before we formally introduce you and Julie and have you jump into what you're going to talk about, to try to answer your question about the knotweed specifically, because that's the plant that we're most focused on. We do have.
I
a
was
number
in
of pilot
somebody's
projects.
backyard last night, right by a big, like a small lake. It was just covered with knotweed.
Right, so we have, it's a really huge challenge. Most experts will say you'll never get rid of it, you can only control it. This is the short version, because we've got to save time here and jump into your presentation. But we have done a number of pilot projects around the watershed, and there are 5 or 6 techniques that you can use, physical techniques on the ground. Mowing is probably the best example, but it's going to take, private property by private property, right? A lot of the Upper Delaware is, we don't have these large swaths of public land that we can get on and do that kind of work. So it's really, a lot of it is about homeowner education, which is where you were headed there with your question. And we have literature, and we can share that with your office, Aileen. And if you could help us get that out to your constituents, that would be,
I sure
that
will.
would be awesome.
Yeah.
So we have a whole knotweed program that we can share with you. But I do want to thank Jim Parham for coming, and Jim, I do have your, so folks know, Jim, I got them. See, you sent them, and I actually have them. Here they are. So we are in possession of all your work, and we're now thinking about ways to make it bigger and expand on it, and we'll be tapping into your knowledge for that in the future for sure. So thank you so much for coming.
Excellent. Great talking with you again.
Okay, I'm going to segue us into the next session. Aileen has already jumped in, but I'm going to just take a second, Aileen, and introduce you. And we're going now from the science on the river to more about the politics around the river, specifically about a couple of funding developments that have occurred. One has happened, and it's been a great advantage to us. I mentioned it in my opening comments. We are now in the New York State Environmental Protection Fund as a specified line item. The Upper Delaware River now has a line item in the state program that funds environmental protection, which is enormous victory for us. And then we have an upcoming funding opportunity, and that's going to be on the November 8th ballot for New York voters only. And it's a bond act, it's an environmental bond act that could also help supplement all the resources we've been able to generate over the last few years coming into the watershed. So first, I want to start at that state level and introduce Assemblywoman Aileen Gunther from Sullivan County, New York. We've gotten to know Aileen over the last few years, and she's been a great champion for the Upper Delaware River up in Albany, up in the state legislature, where she led the effort to secure that line item I just mentioned in the Environmental Protection Fund. We couldn't have done it without her. She's just a great champion of the river. I want you all to get to know her a little bit better, and maybe Aileen, and maybe really we'd like to hear the story of kind of, how your affinity with the river. We know you grew up there. We know you live near a tributary, the Neversink. You're a state legislator. It would be great to hear your story about how we won up in Albany in the state budget process. And then I'm going to shift over to Julie Ty. He's going to talk more about the Bond Act and she's from the New York League of Conservation Voters. So Aileen, go for it.
Well, my story is I'm actually from the Bronx, and I came up to Sullivan County, and I live pretty close to the rivers. I live close to the Rio. We have land that's been in the family now for 6 generations that we've kept it wooded. And when I first came, I lived in the Bronx, and then I lived in California. When I came, I didn't think I'd love being where I live, but now I've come to love it. And it's funny, this morning, I had some friends of my daughter, my daughter lives in Texas, in Dallas, Texas, and her friends happen to be in Narrowsburg. And this is their first visit to our area, and they couldn't believe when they saw the Delaware River. And then I took them behind my house, and I was showing them our pond, and I was telling them about how it runs into the Rio River. And, every time you tell the story, people are just amazed. The beauty of our community, not only that, but also how precious the water is in our community, and how, I will continue to advocate for funding, because I know how important it is to protect it. I know through my tenure, sometimes we have to bring people up from Albany and from Albany or New York City to talk about our rivers and how important it is to make sure there are line items in the budget and that we are spending money to protect the water and the environment around the water. And it's just whether it's the growth in an area and making sure that things are done correctly. I know that down by the Delaware River, there's been kind of a back and forth about a project that's either going to go forward or not go forward. It's called FEMO. And I know there's a lot of people that are a little bit anxious about this whole thing because of the fact that, there'll be a lot of people and will they, be educated to make sure that this water is preserved and making sure the Delaware is preserved. So, 17 million people get their drinking water, 17 million people. So we really have to make sure that there's an understanding, whether it's the governor of New York State, Kathy Hochul, and the Senate, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, and Carl Hastie, to make sure that they understand the value of this water and how if it's not preserved, the impact that it would have on New York City. And I think a lot of people don't realize that we are protecting, the essence of life is really water, and we're protecting it up here. And I just want to thank you for all you do. And, it's important that at about November, this is an election year, and if all goes well, all goes well. And in November, we start the asks for New York State and the NCON budget for monies again. So we had some, but then if we think about knotweed, what can we do to act like we asked, Pennsylvania, New York for money to invest in, this invasive species to, try to cut it off at this point. I know I see it all over the place, and each year there's more and more. And what can we do? We need more research and development. Is that what we need? I mean, I'm not a scientist, but I'm certainly willing to advocate for that. So, I think the most important thing in my, you're the experts, and I follow your command and your lead, and getting to me in early November to put in our request for the budget. Also, if there's any legislation necessary, that's all important. And, any restoration that's necessary, and money that of course needs money. And we also need funding to make sure people stay in that position and continue protecting our water.
Great. Aileen, thank you.
I don't know if,
Can I,
I think that the story's been told. I had things written down, but it's all already been said. So I just want you to know that I'm here to work with you because you're the experts. And, it means a lot to me because I live
Thank
so
you, Aileen.
close.
Can I ask you a question about the legislative process?
Right.
I'm sure Julie could chime in too. Now that the line item has been enacted by the legislature in the last budget signed by the governor, what do we as a community, what does FUDR as a leader of this coalition and all of our partner groups, what do we need to do to make sure that keeps going? And when do we need to start doing it?
So, I mean, we have the election coming up. And so January 1 is, the day that we usually go up there. And I think Julia, letter writing is important, getting to Kathy Hochul. Has Kathy Hochul visited this area? Julia?
She has not. She has not. She has.
I think
she's
that
on
you
our
need to,
list.
because Schumer's been there. And so I
do
think
think the
pardon?
EPF, so oftentimes when there's legislative additions to the Environmental Protection Fund, the Division of Budget starts by striking them and making people come back and ask for them. So in this case, we know that there was support among the staff in the governor's office who does the environment, who we want to advocate for now that there's a $400 million a year environmental protection fund to maintain this as a minimum. So I do think there's value. The EPF is one of the last things that the state does in their budget. But I think there's value in us doing a letter in the next month or so that it's there already to the governor, really to the staff that manages this budget, and to the Division of Budget, urging them to conclude this and include references to the fact that having this money, plus the money I'm going to talk about, will help us to leverage federal funding, right? In the region, to help us, get all the projects done that we need to do to protect the Delaware River area. So
Yeah,
because
I think
step
it's
one is
also,
you want the governor to include it. I agree with Aileen, trying to get the governor to visit would be fantastic.
but the other thing is you also have to make sure that Andrea Stewart Cousins, Carl Hasty get that letter. And then the big money guy in the New York State Assembly, of course, is Blake Washington. He's developing the budget. So all of that, if that goes CCing it to those people so that it's on everybody's mind, and, we're not going to stop until we get what we want.
Absolutely.
That's what I would
100%
say.
agree with that.
The more people that, and then you have Steve Engelbright, who is a tremendous environmentalist, and he's head of NCON. He's another one that's important. And Steve, I brought here already, and he knows the value. And so he's another person to get on board. He's a Long Island guy, but
let me correct. Yeah, Steve played a critical role last year in our
Yeah.
in our strategy to get where we
Yeah.
to get where we got. I just want to make sure I didn't misspeak. The governor certainly has been to this region, but not for the express purpose of promoting the Upper Delaware River, and that's
correct.
what we want. We want her to
Yes.
talk about. That's what you're talking about. Amy.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me. Julie, I kind of got a chance to introduce you, but I'll try again. Julie,
I have to jump off. You know what time of year it is.
We
yeah,
do.
thank you, Assemblywoman.
Say a
I'm
prayer.
really-
Thanks,
Thank you.
Aileen.
Okay, bye.